Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I love old drag cars. And one of the most popular old drag cars out there is called the Gasser. And this type of car gets a lot of attention. Sometimes it can be confused as far as what is a Gasser and what's not a Gasser. So I thought I'd cover that. So follow along as I explain a little bit more about period correct Gassers and then dig into the rules package of the Southeast Gassers group. And then I'm going to show you some racing action from Knoxville Dragstrip. It gets a little bit wild and crazy. You want to stick around to see Gary Klein's wild ride in his Tasmanian Devil 41 wheelies. He's okay, but the car, not so much. So back in the early days of drag racing, there were lots of different class designations. You know, you had your dragsters and your roadsters and your competition coupes. You had all sorts of different things that separated the cars. You know, it was just there was a lot of ways to level the playing field. So you didn't have a dragster running up against a completely stock street car. One of the most popular classes, especially in the 1960s, was the gas coupe and sedan class. This class consisted of stock-bodied vehicles. Now they could have fiberglass front ends or fiberglass doors, anything like that to lighten the body, but it had to be stock appearing. So the rules changed throughout the years and kind of followed the theme of the cars. And in the late 60s and early 70s, the gas classes changed big time. They made some big changes that really took these cars from kind of stockish looking cars to almost a funny car. You were allowed to run spindle mount wheels at that point. You were allowed to do a lot of things to alter the car that you were not allowed to do earlier in the 60s. And that's the area that Quain Stott and his group, the Southeast Gassers Association, that's where they focus. They want to focus on that mid to late 60s where the cars were fast, the cars looked cool, they had the right stance. You know, this was the absolute sweet spot of the Gasser era. If the name Quain Stott sounds familiar, that's because he's a world championship winning drag racer. He raced pro modified cars for many years, and when he decided to retire from that, he wanted to build a nostalgia car. He wanted to build a period correct Gasser, something with a 4-speed, something with a straight axle, something with a high winding engine. You know, he really wanted to dig in and make this happen. So he did, and a few other friends kind of followed suit, and they built just a handful of cars, and they started doing little races here and there, and this thing took off. And despite what others might have said about this organization, it grew quickly and grew, you know, it continues to grow. And to the point now where the races have 80 to 90 cars competing in all different classes, and it has a extremely strict rules package. This is something that Quain has taken very seriously. He wants the cars to be as authentic as possible and to put on the best race as possible. So he's balanced the rule package to include side-by-side heads-up racing. He doesn't want people to, you know, just absolutely outrun the competition. He wants it to be side-by-side. And he's not going to do bracket racing. That's out of the question. It's going to be heads-up, first to the finish line wins. No bracket racing, no handicaps, no buybacks, none of that. It's first to the finish line wins. He's got several classes. He's got several ways to get involved. And it has really just exploded. It's turned into a big deal. It's also turned into a huge spectator sport. Over the years, you know, it's kind of been hard to convince people that these things are fun to watch. And because they might have seen other gassers at other events, they're like, it's not really all that exciting because, you know, they're not all that fast. Well, Quain changed that. He made all of his drivers run 4-speed manual transmissions. He made all of his drivers set the cars up in a certain way to where they're excited. They do wheel stands. They do wheel stands in second gear and third gear, and they're wild and crazy cars. So from a spectator standpoint, there's not a better action-packed race out there. One thing you'll notice is that they don't show any ETs. Every Southeast Gassers race is an 1/8 mile race. It's all heads up, but they decided not to show the ETs so that if there was a dominant car, that, you know, your fans, your spectators, didn't say, well, I know that he's going to win. There's no use in even staying to the finals. And that's really worked because as you see some of these crowds at these places where they're packing 2,000 or 3,000 people into these little tracks, you know, the crowd is still thick when it's time for the finals. And that's a big deal because any other race you go to, that's not the case. By the time the finals are running, people have kind of got burned out and they've already hit the road and gone home. So let's go over some of the rules and some of the classes to give you a better idea of how these guys build these cars. So you've got A-gas. That's kind of your top dogs. That's going to be your lightest weight cars with your biggest engines. And essentially they build these cars to a 6 pounds per cubic inch rule. B-gas is your next step down. That's 8 pounds per cubic inch. And similar set of rules otherwise as far as straight axle, manual transmission, you know, a certain height off the ground. Wheels have to stick out just a little. They can't be pulled in. They can't have narrowed rear ends with the tires tucked up under. That's not accurate for the 60s. C-gas is the next one down. That's 10 pounds per cubic inch. So that's the easiest one to do the math on. So let's say you've got 300 cubic inch small block Chevy. You're going to have to weigh 3,000 pounds. So this is a tough class to compete in, and a lot of the guys are building smaller motors so that they can run lighter cars. So again, you've got some really cool combinations. You've got some really high winding engines in that C-gas class. I'm talking about 10,000 RPMs plus. That makes for a huge difference for the fans. When somebody pulls that thing into the burnout box and turns it up to 10 grand, people notice. I mean, it gets your attention. Same way with leaving the line. I mean, they're leaving the line at big RPMs, stretching these things out, banging gears, you know, really putting on a show for the fans. Meanwhile, they're racing their hearts out to try to be the first to the finish line. You have no idea how much work goes into these things because when you get there and you're in the pits, these cars look extremely simple. You look at one of these motors, there's not a bunch of wiring hanging off of it. There's 2 carburetors sitting up on top of this thing, and it's going out there and absolutely running wild. I mean, these things are fast. So some of the cars, whether it's C-gas, B-gas, or A-gas, some of them are running mechanical fuel injection, which was a popular thing in the 60s. Hilburn fuel injection, you know, got the 8 stacks sticking up. That's period correct. That's actually preferred by Quain. He'll give you a little bit of a weight break on that to try to mix it up a little bit. So not, you know, you don't want every single car and every single combination to be the same. You don't want, you know, 90 small block Chevys with tunnel rams and 2 4s in the field. You want it to be mixed up a little bit. So, you know, certain combinations get a weight break. Quain is really picky about the wheels on these cars because the worst possible thing is to have a period correct car and have the wrong wheels on it. And I mean, I agree with that even on a regular street car. Wheels and tires make a big difference in the overall look of the car. So for him, he's got to really put his foot down on these wheels because there's a lot of wheels that kind of play into the vintage crowd, but they don't quite do the job when it comes to being correct or authentic. So he has made a list of wheels that are accepted, and he's made a list of wheels that are not accepted. So the racers kind of have to follow that. What a lot of the guys have done is they've restored vintage magnesium wheels for the cars because, number one, they're the most correct things you can possibly get, and number two, they're a little bit lighter than an aluminum wheel. So you kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. I actually sold 2 pairs of magnesium wheels to Todd Oden, who has 2 cars in the Southeast Gassers group. He's got an A-gas 57 Chevy station wagon and a C-gas 58 Chevy 2-door post. And on both cars he had aluminum slotted mags on there, and he wanted real deal magnesium wheels. So he bit the bullet. He completely redid both cars as far as the wheel and tire package, and now he's got magnesium wheels front and back on both cars. I'll show you a little bit more of Todd Oden's cars in a future episode on the channel, so stay tuned for that. Some of the rules that Quain put in place are more for keeping a level playing field and not quite so much about being authentic, because you'll see, not every gasser in the 60s had a straight axle under the front. It was just a very popular thing to do. Not every gasser had a manual transmission, but again, a very popular thing to do. So Quain decided to level the playing field and not give anybody a specific advantage. He was going to make every car have a straight axle front end. He was going to make every car have a manual transmission. But he was going to allow, an aftermarket type transmission like a Hightower or G-Force to compete, because he didn't want cars going out there and just breaking the guts out of a Muncie 4-speed. So, he stretches the rules as far as authenticity goes when it comes to making sure the cars go down the track without braking all the time. He wants for there to not be a lot of downtime. He wants the cars to go side by side, and that's kind of part of the equation there, is getting these things to be consistent and dependable, even though they're unpredictable. The nature of these cars is that they could go left, they could go right, they could go straight up onto the back bumper. There's so many variables that go into these cars, so you can only tune so much of that out of it. So the number one rule for the Southeast Gassers Association is that all the cars have to run on gasoline. Now that seems pretty simple, but in some of the other nostalgia groups, they allow alcohol, which wouldn't have been allowed back then. So Quain wanted to stay pretty strict on the type of fuel that people could use. Now you can use high octane racing fuel, that's not a big deal, but no alcohol. The only alcohol that's allowed in this racing series is in the AFX class, which there's just a handful of cars that run in there, and that's kind of an exhibition class. They don't really have the points championship like the gas classes or anything like that. So they kind of have a different set of rules, but they also have to be period correct. So Quain's pretty picky about that kind of stuff, and I don't blame him, because it'd be really easy to fall off the wagon in terms of rules when it comes to those exhibition cars. But he's really strict on it, and it puts on a great show for the fans. So let's get right into the action from Knoxville Dragstrip. I was fortunate enough to go there and cover it for All Chevy Performance magazine. It's a brand new magazine coming out, and so I didn't shoot the whole thing in video. I shot it in stills for that magazine, but I also wanted to bring you some video action from this event. So I did that. I kind of mixed it up a little bit. So let's go ahead and get into that. Enjoy. And if you want to find out more about the Southeast Gassers, or find out if they're coming to a town near you, go to southeastgassers.com. You can check them out on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. They got it all.